presidential election may all come down to one state, Pennsylvania, and on Friday, the state's Supreme Court threw out a lower court decision ruling that mail-in ballots marked with incorrect dates or no dates at all on the outer envelope will not be counted in the general election. Just a reminder of how close it could be. In 2020, Biden narrowly won PA by 1.2 percentage points. In 2022, more than 10,000 mail-in ballots in the Commonwealth's midterm election were tossed out due to dating errors. Pennsylvania isn't the only battleground state where Republicans are demanding their election officials reject certain mail-in ballots that fail to comply with their state laws. In North Carolina, the GOP suing to throw out ballots if the inner secrecy envelope is not fully sealed. In Georgia, they're fighting to have ballots thrown out if the voter fails to accurately write their birthday on the outer envelope. In Michigan, they're suing for stricter rules on matching signatures. And in Nevada, mail-in ballots can be received 3 days after the election, so long as they were postmarked by November 5th. But Republicans are suing to have those ballots tossed as well. As a result of all of these legal battles, we might not have a clear or immediate winner on election night. According to the New York Times, more Americans are using mail-in ballots, which take longer to count than those cast in person. This is also putting a lot of pressure on the U.S. Postal Service. Just this week, nearly 36 local and state election officials sounded the alarm about failures like lost or delayed election mail, inconsistent guidelines for training postal workers, and higher rates of mail being returned to voters as, quote, undeliverable. In a statement to CNN, the U.S. Postal Service says we were successful in 2020, delivering a historic volume of mail-in ballots, also in 2022, and will do so again in November 2024. Joining me now is the Kansas Secretary of State, Scott Schwab, who noted in his own letter to the Postmaster General that roughly 1,000 voters in Kansas were disenfranchised in the most recent primary due to the Postal Service's administrative failures. Thanks so much for being here, Mr. Secretary. So in your recent primary, 18% voted by mail. Then what happened?
Well, here's the frustration is states have rights. We have a very federalist policy as it relates to elections, and states have right to make policy as it relates to elections. And Kansas has a simple one. Just postmark the ballot, and the post office says they will. And we had ballots show up on election day, which means they were legally cast, that weren't postmarked, but because of the law, they were thrown out. And all you have to do is just postmark it. And even in the OIG report, the post office said, we are not following our own guidelines. And this is frustrating when in local elections, oftentimes we have close results and the post office is basically suppressing voters.
Do you think that it's because of poor training and that maybe some of the postal employees, they think, oh, this is an official ballot, it doesn't require our postmark?
That's hearsay. I don't know. I just know that it's probably training, it's probably funding, it's probably laziness, it's probably not making it a priority. It's a conglomerate of issues, but for cycle after cycle after cycle, the post office delivers great on excuses, but they don't deliver great on ballots. And they never provide solutions or a plan to say how we're going to do better.
You wrote your own letter, as I referenced, to the Postmaster General. Did you get a response?
Not yet.
So in my home state of Pennsylvania, my reaction to reading about what's going on, if you'll pardon the pun, what's the matter with Kansas, to think of the book title, my reaction was to say, okay, well, then maybe they ought to use drop-offs, but that doesn't work in a rural state like yours the way that it does work in a state like mine, right?
No, actually it does work. I won a heated primary in 2022 campaigning on drop boxes, which are owned by the county, because in liberal Kansas, which is in the southwest corner of our state, is closer to Santa Fe, New Mexico than it is to Kansas City. If you mail your ballot in liberal Kansas, it goes to Lubbock, Texas, to go to Kansas City to show up across the street. Just use a drop box. But oftentimes that's not an option for voters. Some people, whether it's a paraplegic, stroke victims, people that have limit physical capabilities, they have to use the post office, and the post office is not making them a priority. And it's frustrating. And by the way, being from Pennsylvania, Al Schmidt, you've got a great secretary right there.
He was my guest last week. So look, your state's not among the 7. We don't talk a lot about the outcome of Kansas in the presidential race. I was eager to have you here because I think this is a window into some of the complications being experienced across the country. And if it's all as close as people forecast, these factors are going to kick in.
I think it's massive. And the post office is not taking it clearly. They're clearly not taking it as serious as they should. In 2020, there was an uptick in success by the post office. It's because all eyes were on them because so many places were going to mail ballots only because they were closing down in-person voting. That's not the case so much anymore. And so the eyes are off them. So it seems like they're just not taking it as seriously. So yes, I wrote the letter to get eyes on them and people to take it seriously because your vote may not count. In House District 51 in Leavenworth, Kansas, it was decided by 22 votes. If 60 ballots showed up legally, that could change it. But because the post office didn't do typical things they should do, that the will of the people may not have reflected in what we certified in the election because of a federal agency.
So give me the 20-second takeaway to people who are viewing this from all over the country now and contemplating voting by mail. Are you spooking them into not casting a mail ballot and instead making sure they show up?
No, well, always voting in person is always the most secure way to secure that your vote gets counted. But if you're doing advance by mail, use a drop box that's run by the county and is secure. Give it to the county election officials. Give it to a polling place. Give it to any advanced early voting place. But don't ever give your ballot to the federal government.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I hope you get a response from the Postal Service.
Thank you, Michael. Have a good morning.